Hello all, Bob Pisani down on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. We are here to do something a little unusual today. We're going to talk about a new movie. It's an important movie. It's called Tune Out the Noise. Interesting title. We want to talk about what this is all about. It's really about an unlikely cast of upstarts who transformed the investment landscape beginning in the 1960s, including a bunch of upstarts at the University of Chicago, academics and some students. Joining us is one of those students. Look who's here. David Booth is the chairman of Dimensional Fund Advisors and the director of the film, Errol Morris, legendary director of The Fog of War, The Thin Blue Line, so many other great movies. David, I got to start with you. You're not only in the film, you financed the film. Now, I know a guy like Errol Morris does not come cheap, but tell me, what's the motivation? Why did you feel the need to make a movie about the stock market, and what is it you want to say here?
Well, it didn't start off to be a movie about the stock market. What we're interested in, and I know you have a personal interest in this as well, is helping people better understand how the markets work. And that's been kind of a lifelong passion. So being a great communicator over here, we said, how can you help us in the communication? And he kind of got my view of it. I'm interested in yours. He just got fired up and said, I want to make a movie about this.
But what's the movie about? What are you trying to communicate here?
Well, it's really about how markets work and how different that is from people's kind of intuition or perception. People think intuitively that if you are smarter and work harder and have more resources than the next guy, you can do a better job of picking stocks. And it turns out that's just not true.
So it's really about the indexing revolution that has transformed investing. It started back in the research that was done in the 1960s.
Yeah, right. And you know, the two things about that. Number one, it's lasted, and which is unusual in economic research, that one set of data ever repeats itself in the future. And secondly, it worked. These people are getting a much better deal now than when I started in 1971.
Yeah. Earl, you've done so many famous documentaries. The Fog of War, people don't know, is about Robert McNamara, won the Academy Award. The Thin Blue Line, a very famous movie about the shooting of a Dallas police officer. Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control, one of my personal favorite movies of all time. I'm just curious about the stock market. You had such an illustrious career in documentary filmmaking. What is it about this story that interests you? I mean, presumably you don't need the work. You could have just said no. There must be something that interested you here.
Well, many things. I just revealed to David moments ago that I used to be a private detective.
Really?
Really. And one of the things that I worked on repeatedly were investments, investment fraud. And so I have been interested in the stock market, investing for many, 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 many years. This is, if anything, an incredible opportunity to learn something. Why make movies unless you can learn something from making them? And I learned an enormous amount. And I got introduced to some fabulous characters. There's an amazing group of people that are included in this film, and I was privileged to interview them and to make a film with them.
Yeah. So it's really an educational film to a large extent. I mean, you've done that for years with even your documentaries, what look like documentaries.
Educational film seems like a dirty word.
It does.
I prefer to think of it as something where you can enjoy something, learn something, meet some people that you would never have met otherwise. Right. The stories that I heard, unending. Yeah. One of the reasons I became a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, whatever you want to call it, is I like to hear people telling stories, and this is filled with it.
Yeah. But I say the word educational film in a positive way. I just saw the Bob Dylan biopic, A Complete Unknown. And if you look at this movie, it's a sort of straightforward biopic about Bob Dylan's early life, but really, it's really an educational movie about why is Bob Dylan famous? An average 25-year-old has no idea. Why is he so famous? Well, this film explains why. How did the stock market revolution that happened with indexing in the 1960s that David was a part of change people's lives? Here's the explanation, it seems like. That's important. You could say educational film's a dirty word, but it's important to explain to people.
Well, it's about this belief that we all have. You might think of it as an empowering belief. I no longer think of it that way. That somehow you can beat the market. It's a path to untold riches. You just pick the stocks that you think that are going to do well and avoid the stocks that you think are going to do badly. And this is a really great idea when there was no data to back it up. It just could be imaginative, hopeful thinking on your part. And as a result of this revolution through computers and data that he was a central part of, we find that's not true.
Yeah, it's amazing how much has changed. But there's the art to this that I'm interested in. You're talking to academics. This could come out very, very dry. How do you make that compelling, that story? I mean, to us, we live in this world. To us, this is a great story. But the average person maybe not quite understand it. Was there some kernel that you found that was really interesting to wrap your head around? I'm just interested in the art of how to make this story compelling.
I don't think it's one thing. I think it's many things, many characters, many stories, and a really significant revolution. I don't know how many people realize that these guys were part of a very important revolution in how we see markets and investing. A revolution that really changed the world. Who wouldn't want to make a movie about that?
How do you go ahead.
If I could just interject. I asked kind of Errol the same thing. What fascinated him about doing this project? He goes, "You're all such a quirky group of people."
Yeah.
I go,
Fabulous. Fabulous group of quirky people.
Yeah, it took a lot to, it's funny, we all sort of take this as gospel today, that you really can't beat the market and you ought to stay with it. And active fund managers are a great group of people. They're all really smart, but they don't beat the market by and large. We just had the SPIVA report out today, and that has been done for decades, and clearly shows that 90% of fund managers do not outperform the markets over 10 years period. 90% don't outperform. I mean, and
that seems like a rather large figure.
Yeah, it seems rather large. You know what people say to me? They just say, well, then find us the 10% that outperform. Where are they? And what happens, as you know, David, is there's no persistence. That 10% is not the same people year after year. It's quite remarkable, really.
Yeah, no, one of the interesting things about going to school in Chicago was students see those statistics, and what they conclude is, boy, am I really an exceptional person? Because I know I'm going to be in that 10%. Yeah. Rather than saying, because 90% don't, maybe I should not think about that as a career.
You were a student back then, and of course, very famous people. I've interviewed Eugene Fama, who's much of his research won the Nobel Economics Prize based on your research or based on your company. Myron Scholes, Robert Merton, Ken French. What was it so extraordinary about the University of Chicago in the 1960s that the impact was enormous here?
The impact was enormous. Well, I think part of it was the University of Chicago created a survivorship bias-free database. Let's not get into that, but it's a necessary, issue in statistics. So, and that revolution, it made it possible to do this research without having a lot of just exposed bias. Yeah. And you had people like Fama glom onto it, Michael Jensen, Myron, all these people, they were there at the university and they had the tapes, so they had early access to the data.
Yeah, and a clean database is really important.
Yeah.
That's really essential. I got to ask you about the markets right now. Today, the markets are down again, so it's several days. It's turmoil around tariffs, concerns about a slower economy. What do you tell people who get nervous about these short-term movements in the stock market?
Well, I tell them don't even try to attempt time short-term movements in the market. One of the reasons I'm still so excited about our business and the opportunity to educate people about markets is it's incredibly sad to me that every time the market drops, you get people discouraged and bail out. And one of the keys to investing is finding a strategy that you can stick with for the long term and get that benefit of compounding over time that Einstein called the eighth wonder of the world.
Yes.
And so what I tell them is, look, looks to me like tariffs might be, with the market, I don't try to forecast what tariffs are going to do. I'm trying to interpret what the market seems to be saying. Is tariffs aren't that good a deal, is what it appears to be saying. Now, but what people don't realize is, armed with that information, that's useless, because you have to figure that out before the market does, if you're going to profit from it.
Yeah, efficient market hypothesis is already priced into the market. So how I guess what I'm asking a roundabout question is, how do you get people to focus on the long term? Because this too will pass.
Well, that's that's what I said. That's what keeps me excited. If I had the answer, I would share it with you. That's something we're really working on. That's one of the reasons we want to do this documentary, is to help people understand more about markets and how they work. And see, another thing is, people have a tendency to think of themselves as outsiders, and the people that really make the money in the stock market are the insiders. And all this research that came out from Chicago, all the people that Errol interviewed, these are pretty much outsiders. You know, people grew up in real modest circumstances.
One of the things that makes the story so interesting.
Most of them grew up in modest circumstances.
Indeed.
Yeah. I guess the question then is keeping people focused on the long term. I always tell people that are in this business, I interview stockbrokers and people who are in strategists, and I tell them, you need to focus on what business you're in. And they'll say, well, I'm a stockbroker or I'm a strategist, but really they're in the dreams business. You're in the dreams business. You're in the business of helping people realize a happy retirement, putting their kids through college. That's the dreams business. You could say, oh, I own an investment company. Yeah, but that's true, but not interesting.
No, I like the way you describe it. It really is that way. And the reward in this business is, people coming up to you if they're retired, saying, I'm living well in retirement. Just thanks, for all your help. That's what the business is about.
You're in the dreams business.
In the dreams business.
Errol Morris, you've had such an illustrious career in filmmaking. I wonder how you feel about the current state of filmmaking. I talk to friends of mine who are passionate about films. They're worried about jobs in the business. They're worried about AI. They're worried about AIs writing scripts. They're worried about AI actors that are out there. You're a veteran in this business. Any thoughts about the current state of filmmaking?
Well, there's always something to worry about. Wouldn't be the world that I know if there weren't worries connected with everything in it. I'm still ongoing as a filmmaker. I'm grateful to that. And I want to continue making movies. In many ways, it becomes easier than ever to make and finance market movies. Look at us right here. This is a project that I could never imagine being at the New York Stock Exchange with David Booth and this movie, but here I am, and I am deeply grateful for it.
No matter what, it's still about compelling storytelling. Isn't that it? I mean, connecting with that brain that wants to hear a story, somebody else's story.
It is ultimately about storytelling, and call it the luck of the draw, whatever you want to call it. This was a collection of really, truly remarkable stories, and I was lucky to be able to tell it.
The film is Tune Out the Noise. The man who produced it and directed it, the man who financed it, David Booth from Dimensional Funds, is here with us today, and legendary director Errol Morris. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening.